Emmerdale teases that this is set to be a disastrous week for Robert Sugden, whose relentless pursuit of exposing John as an enemy may backfire in devastating fashion. What began as a subtle vendetta has rapidly snowballed into public disgrace, fractured loyalties, and a trail of consequences that no one, least of all Robert, saw coming. It started with whispers. Robert had long suspected John of harboring ulterior motives, and his instincts rarely failed him. But this time, every accusation he hurled, every suspicion he voiced, was met with eye rolls, skepticism, and subtle disapproval. Robert's frustration brewed into a quiet storm. As he dug deeper, he believed he was getting closer to unveiling John's facade. However, the more noise he made, the more isolated he became. John, ever the strategist, struck back with an unforgiving blow. In a calculated move, he leaked private information about Robert, details from a past Robert thought he had buried deep. Allegations, shady dealings, and betrayals that Robert had long kept in the dark were now public knowledge, circulating through the village like wildfire. Ross Barton was the first to connect the dots. Weeks ago, Lewis's secret cannabis stash had been ransacked, and while no one ever found the culprit, Ross had his suspicions. John's disclosure confirmed it. Robert had been behind it. With rage simmering just beneath the surface, Ross confronted Robert at the Woolpack. It began with venom-laced words, but quickly escalated into a full-blown shouting match. "You think you're clever, do you? Manipulating everyone like chess pieces. Stealing from Lewis, you've crossed the wrong people." Robert, jaw clenched, refused to back down. "You don't know what you're talking about. I did what I had to." But Mackenzie Boyd, who had quietly listened from the other end of the bar, had heard enough. He stepped forward, his face unreadable. "You put people in danger, Robert. You made enemies out of allies. You made one out of me." That moment sealed it. Whatever fragile civility had once existed between Mac and Robert shattered like glass. Mac had long struggled with how to categorize Robert, as a former partner's ex, as a sometimes ally, sometimes nuisance. But now the lines were clear. Robert was not to be trusted. Meanwhile, at Butler's farm, Moira Dingle was dealing with her own mounting crisis. She had been troubled for days over the missing stash of prescription drugs, a loss she originally chalked up to careless record-keeping. But after the break-in by two unknown teenagers, and the unnerving fact that her sons Kyle and Isaac had been nearby at the time, her suspicions evolved into dread. Initially, Moira had suspected Joe Tate. She believed the thug-like intrusion had his fingerprints all over it. But new evidence suggested otherwise. Through conversations and a little digging, she learned the break-in had ties to Robert's shady dealings, including the unauthorized purchase of her land. She confronted Robert, voice trembling not with fear, but with fury. "You think this is a game? That you can play with people's lives? You put my boys in danger, and for what?" Another power move. Robert tried to defend himself, tried to justify his actions as necessary leverage in a larger plan, but the damage was done. Moira's trust, already fragile, was obliterated. Behind the scenes, a more sinister figure moved his pieces. Ray, a notorious drug dealer, had caught wind of the upheaval and seen opportunity. He dispatched Dylan and a mysterious associate to survey Butler's farm, hoping to uncover whether more drugs were being grown or trafficked. Their arrival coincided too conveniently with Robert's scheming, adding further weight to the mounting evidence that he had unleashed a chain of chaos. Aaron Livesey, Robert's former husband, heard bits and pieces of the stories as they unfolded. At first, he denied them. He wanted to believe that Robert, the man he had once loved so fiercely, had finally grown, matured. But as facts crystallized, Aaron was forced to confront an ugly truth. Robert hadn't changed. He had simply adapted, reshaping his manipulations to suit new circumstances. Aaron vented his disappointment to anyone who would listen. He always makes it about him, doesn't he? Always has an excuse. But at some point, you run out of them. John watched it all unfold with a tinge of satisfaction. While he had never anticipated things spiraling this far, the dismantling of Robert Sugden had, at the very least, worked in his favor. Still, some part of him recoiled when he overheard Victoria Sugden reprimanding her brother. Victoria, perhaps the only person left who truly wanted to see Robert redeemed, had grown weary. You want people to back you, Robert? Then stop lying to them. Stop making it impossible to help you. Her words were sharp, but the pain behind them was sharper. She had fought for him for so long, shielded him from judgment, reminded others of the good in him. But Robert's recent behavior made even her question her loyalty. John lingered near enough to witness the exchange, and for a brief moment, guilt tugged at him. He had played his own part in Robert's downfall. He could see how alone Robert now stood, stripped of allies, buried under the consequences of his own making. But then came the smirk, subtle, fleeting. Robert's punishment had been self-inflicted. All John did was let the truth breathe. And as Emmerdale buzzed with rumors, broken alliances, and growing tension, Robert Sugden was left to reckon with the silence. A silence once filled by allies, now ringing with the echo of his own decisions. Alone and surrounded by whispers, Robert trudged up the path toward Mill Cottage, but it no longer felt like home. Every stone beneath his feet seemed to echo the mistakes he couldn't undo, and every glance from passers-by was a reminder of how far he had fallen. As he unlocked the door, the silence that greeted him was heavy, almost mocking. Meanwhile, the fallout continued to spread. Ross wasn't finished with his public denouncement. Still fuming from the confrontation at the Woolpack, he made it his mission to ensure that no one in the village forgot Robert's betrayal. He spoke to Lewis directly, confirming what he had long suspected, that Robert had orchestrated the theft of the cannabis stash, not for justice, but for his own gain. He saw a way to leverage power, Ross told Lewis. Didn't matter who got hurt. You, me, anyone. Mackenzie doubled down on his new stance as Robert's adversary. He visited Moira at Butler's farm to offer support, surprising her with how invested he seemed. This isn't about revenge, Mac explained. It's about keeping people like Robert from making pawns out of all of us. Moira appreciated the sentiment, though her thoughts were scattered. She had just discovered fresh tire tracks near the barn, signs that Dylan and the mysterious associate had returned. The possibility of Ray's men still probing the area chilled her. She told Mackenzie that Robert's manipulations had drawn dangerous eyes to her doorstep, and for that, she couldn't forgive him. Back in the village, Aaron avoided Robert entirely. He had taken to staying with Chuz and Paddy, retreating into the comfort of family. But it didn't bring peace. His mind kept circling back to all the times he had defended Robert, all the lies he had overlooked in the name of love. One evening, as he sat outside the pub nursing a pint, Victoria approached. You doing okay? She asked gently. Aaron shrugged. Depends what okay even means anymore. Victoria sat beside him, their silence speaking louder than any words. Finally, she said, I keep thinking maybe he just needs a chance to explain. But maybe some things aren't worth explaining. John, in the meantime, began to sense the weight of his victory. Though he had succeeded in discrediting Robert, the ripples of his actions were now reaching him. A local contractor pulled out of a joint deal, wary of the drama John's involvement had stirred up. A subtle message from the village, that no one wins when games are played with people's lives. Still, John remained composed. He reminded himself that Robert had brought this upon himself. All he had done was reveal the truth. Yet as he watched Victoria help Aaron into her car one evening, he wondered if he had gone too far. At Butler's farm, tensions escalated when Kyle, overhearing a tense conversation, asked Moira if Robert was going to hurt them again. The question hit her like a hammer. Moira realized the true cost of Robert's schemes wasn't land or money, it was the fear etched into her son's voice. She decided it was time to act. Moira marched down to Mill Cottage and confronted Robert directly. "I want you gone," she said. "Out of the village. Out of our lives. You don't just bring trouble, Robert, you invite it in, feed it, and let it grow." Robert stood still, absorbing the words, but not arguing. For once, he didn't have a counterattack. He simply nodded, the fight drained from him. Ross, watching from across the street, turned away. Part of him had wanted Robert to lash out, to fight back, so the cycle could continue. But seeing him defeated, accepting blame, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like loss. Aaron heard about the confrontation later that night and wrestled with his emotions. Could someone so broken ever be rebuilt? Was there even a version of Robert left worth saving? Victoria's answer was quiet, but resolute when he asked her. "He has to want to change, Aaron. Not for us. For himself." Ray, learning that his men had been spotted again, made the decision to retreat temporarily. The attention Robert had drawn made the farm too hot to touch. But he left Dylan with one warning: Robert Sugden's still in play. "And I don't like loose ends." As night fell over Emmerdale, the village seemed quieter, almost eerily so. But under the surface, nothing had truly settled. Relationships were frayed, trust was broken, and wounds had only begun to scar. And Robert Sugden, sitting alone in a darkened cottage, faced a reckoning that went beyond enemies like John or Ross. The real battle was within, the slow, painful process of recognizing how deeply he had sabotaged himself. The path to redemption, if there was one, would not begin with forgiveness. It would begin with truth.